That's what my dad did. You know, I didn't see him, we had nothing. Like I had one toy for 7 years because every dollar was saved so that he could then buy a small liquor store in New Jersey to make our American dream, and that's what he did. I was a very entrepreneurial kid. By the time we moved to Edison, New Jersey, where he became a manager of a liquor store, I was 6 and I was already selling. My first business transaction was I got the great idea at 5, 6 years old to go around the neighborhood, go into people's yards, rip their flowers out of their yard, go to their door, ring their doorbell, and sell it back to them. Amazing business model, by the way. So that was me. That gives you a little insight to how I was wired. I'll tell you later how my dad saved me from being a bullshit artist. The reality is this. The reason I'm bringing up the origin story is something very weird happened. I only remembered this a couple years ago. If you've seen this talk on YouTube in 2007, 8, 9, 10, 11, I don't talk about this part. And then a friend told me something and it triggered a memory. When I was 7 years old, I had all my friends in the neighborhood convinced to stand behind lemonade stands, and I had 7, 6, or 5 lemonade stands going every summer day. It's interesting what I did though, and it's gonna be very important to where I'm going. I didn't stand behind a lemonade stand, not because I was fancy and thought I was the big boss, it's because I would walk up and down the streets of my neighborhood, sit down, literally sit down on the grass, and think about this, I'm now 7 years old. As a 7-year-old, I thought it was interesting to sit on the grass and for 3, 4 hours at a time, watch cars drive by to try to figure out which tree or which pole to put my lemonade stand sign on. And so somewhere 2 or 3 years ago, I go, my God, it wasn't that I was taught, intuitively, I've been chasing attention my whole life. I am fascinated by where attention is today. We have never, ever seen more disruption to the end consumer's attention than we're seeing right now. What 50% of the global consumer's attention means on this device as a platform, you have no opportunity of succeeding going forward. And all of a sudden, the Facebooks and the WeChats and the LinkedIns and the YouTubes become a hell of a lot more serious. And so for me, what I really want to figure out in this room is the following. Number one, do we have a healthy debate in this audience about the thing that has really popped top of mind to me in the last 3 to 4 years, which is the following. There is a substantial difference between selling and branding. And yet, over the last 6 years, I've become unbelievably aware that the biggest companies in the world mix the two all the time. And I believe, you know, it's funny, I say a lot of things because the way I speak is improv, and I kind of adjust to you. When I just said that, it was interesting to see how many people's heads reacted to that. And it's a stunningly big debate, because as we become more digital in our society, the math becomes more obvious. And I've been fascinated as somebody who used quant and math in the early mid-90s to build a business, that we've become religious about math to a fault in our environment and aren't having the proper debate of what the variable of success is. Or we're not compartmentalizing it and letting math be math over here from a sales transaction standpoint, but then allocating the right dollars to art and creative as a variable to drive our businesses. And what happens when you actually build a brand, how it affects the math and drives down those costs and things of that nature. So I think we are, I'll say it very, very, very black and white. I think this room, we are, depending on how your DNA is structured and how you see the world, we are either the luckiest or the least lucky marketers and operators ever, because the stakes are enormously high. The stakes are so high because the biggest companies in the world will change spots over the next 10 years because of how much attention is actually in this device. We are stunningly underestimating the speed in which the transactions are going to occur on different places and how and why, and who has the leverage and why. Let me explain. In 1996, I launched WineLibrary.com. It was one of the first 3 to 5 e-commerce wine businesses. My dad had a liquor store doing $3.7 million in revenue on 10% gross profit. So we had no money. The internet, how many people here had email in 1997? Raise your hand. Perfect, great. So a lot of you remember, in 1997, for some of the youngsters in this room, the way we read email was we read every fucking email. The marketing that my dad had done and the little marketing that I started doing was more direct mail, was newspaper advertising, and it was fascinating to me to see email. I remember why I took email so serious in 1996. I thought by the year 2000, they would charge us to send email because it was such a good deal. Like I just couldn't wrap my head, remember? Like I couldn't wrap my head around how is this free? I was competing against liquor stores that were sending catalogs in the mail. I would get a Chateau Lafite and send it to them that day. The catalog would come a month later. It cost them $3 to print it and $1 to ship. Spending so much money on programmatic banner garbage that looks good on math from a media buying agency standpoint, but is doing nothing for our businesses, that I don't wanna be the digital guy, I wanna be the what's the attention worth guy. And so for me, it's interesting because I'm always looking for an arbitrage. I just did everything right for 5 years in hindsight, and it was to make every penny worth $1. And that's when you trade attention. That's when you're trying to underbuy attention and not overspend on attention. On Google for 3 days before I realized Google AdWords comes out. It's 3 days old, excuse me. I start running ads. I owned every wine term in America for 5 cents a click. This was before they made it 10 cents minimum. I mean the word wine, let alone the word Bordeaux or Chateau Lafite or what have you. I owned the word wine for 9 months before anybody bid me up. And as you guys can all imagine, the ROI was remarkable, and this is when I had my second regret. How many people here play poker? Raise your hands. Great. I don't, but I do understand the following. When you have the best hand, and you know you have the best hand, it's probably a good idea in certain circumstances to go all in. I had the best hand with Google AdWords, but I didn't go all in. My business was growing. I went from 3 to 15 million like that, right? I had the dollars to spend, but I was still mixing my media. I was still doing outdoor. I was doing local radio. I was doing direct mail. I'm an operator. I run my businesses. I'm here to buy for example, right now I'm looking at outdoor media in America very aggressively because prices are collapsing. So I don't love it. I think every single passenger looks at their phone, so I don't think it's as good of a deal as it was 15 years ago from eyeballs, but if the price gets low enough, I could be convinced. And so for me, that's the thing that is never being talked about. Everybody's drawing lines in the sand in our marketing lab. It's I'm digital, I'm traditional, right? There's all these bots and this is all bullshit and on digital, or nobody watches a television commercial. We have these lines in the sand and we don't have complicated depth, much more thoughtful conversations of what's happening, and then we don't layer at all branding versus sales in those two environments, and I think these are things that I think a lot about. My career took a super interesting turn in 2006, so I'm trucking along with email and Google, right? And I'm doing my thing, business is getting really big. As you can imagine, for an immigrant family, we made it, right? I bought my car at a garage sale. My brother AJ, who's 11 years younger, got a brand new Lexus. I'm a little bitter, but it is what it is. So I'm trucking along, things are going good, and then I come across a website. It's 3 months old at the time, and it's called YouTube. And at this point, YouTube, for any of you that saw YouTube in the first 6 months, it was a very interesting site. YouTube's first seed was a dating site, which really gets referenced nowhere outside of their Wikipedia if you look it up. It's pretty interesting. But then very quickly, as you may remember, it was all copyrighted material. Right? It was all Saturday Night Live and Jimmy Fallon. And I looked at it and I said, this is interesting. I really, again, intuition, I was like, this is gonna be something. So I started playing, and a couple months later, I launched a video blog called Wine Library TV. My family business is called Wine Library. And it was the first time that content had entered my life. Up until this point, I was a retailer, operator, and advertiser and marketer. This was the first time that content, something that I didn't have to spend any money on distribution, entered my life. My concept with Wine Library TV was simple. I sat in front of my table, in front of a camera, with 3 to 4 bottles of wine, and I drank them for 20 minutes. And best gig I ever had, and it worked. And it worked for a couple of reasons. Number one, it worked because YouTube was right, and it was gonna go on to become big. Number two, I thought I was gonna do QVC and Home Shopping Network. I thought it was gonna sell, but as soon as that red light that I see right now came on, I realized, oh shit, this is forever recorded, and if you come to me at a party and say, what do you think about this glass of wine? If I say it's gibberish, but on my show, I said it was great because I wanted to move it, everything would die. So literally, it's funny, I did 1,000 episodes of this show. If I go back to episode 1, somewhere around 3 minutes, because you know how you know yourself, I can see in my face, I'm like, oh shit, I better actually review these the way they have to be reviewed. And so I realized very quickly, I needed to become America's wine guy, not the salesman for my store, which led to a very intriguing era for me where I was panning wines of good suppliers and caused a lot of politics. But this is not why I'm telling you this story. I'm telling you this story because the impact on our business was extraordinary. And it was more ROI positive than any advertising that I was doing. And it's led me to a thesis that I want to leave with, and this is going to be one of the tidbits. I don't know if you write things down, I'm setting it up so you remember it. If you asked me, if we were having dinner and you asked me, what's the number one thing my hospitality group can do? It would be the following, and this is the first time I tasted it in 2006, and I'll give you more of how this has evolved over the last 10 years. I genuinely believe, even if you are in this auditorium right now and you're a B2B SaaS provider for hospitality groups, I believe the statement I'm about to say, which is the following. Going into the next decade, I believe everybody's company in here is a media company first, comma, what they ever do for a living. I believe that if you can wrap your head, and listen, this is not a small thing. The thought that every single person here needs to bring in an editor-in-chief, a producer, a head of content, a chief content officer is not common talk. And I don't mean a marketer, I mean somebody that works at the Wall Street Journal or the BBC or Sports Illustrated. Somebody who is in the media business gets injected, and now you become a lifestyle magazine. Now you become a weekly TV show on Facebook, Snapchat, Instagram, that the number one arbitrage of the next decade, like I believe every single person's company in this room should have a weekly or bi-weekly podcast that is targeted to the audience that they're trying to affect. Leveled up to not be a sales pitch, but to be what Wine Library TV was for me, which is I just tried to provide value. Of course there was trickle down economics to what I was doing, but I never wavered in church and state, which is imperatively difficult for every company in here. And that is a bet that most people won't take because you have to spend hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars up front with no clear-cut ROI in the first 12, 24, or 36 months. That was the first time I felt that. And then basically at that point in my career, I decided that I was right about email and e-commerce and YouTube and Google AdWords, and that I was being stupid, that making more money selling a couple more cases of Chateauneuf de Pape was probably not the right strategy with this intuition. I promised myself the next time I felt it, that feeling, I would become an investor. Because Google bought YouTube, I read an article about angel investing, and I was like, what is this? And that changed the course of my career and probably brought me here today. In 2007, I saw 3 of those companies. They were Twitter, Tumblr, and Facebook. Those were the first 3 investments I made. As you can imagine, that changed the course of my life. And then in 2009, I really took an interesting turn, and it's where all of us connect, which is I started a company called Vaynermedia with my brother AJ. I decided that I wanted to build a private equity operating firm, but the way I was gonna do that was I was gonna spend 10 years in the agency business, learning every industry and figuring out why they were spending the money the way they did, and build a very large firm and take it from there. And that's what I'm doing now. Over the last 5 to 6 years, I've actively been the CEO of an 800-person agency, New York, LA, London, big brands, Pepsi, Unilever, Choice Hotels, things of that nature. So I've learned a lot. It's been very interesting to me, and the biggest takeaway for me is very simple. We are just not marketing in the year that we live in. And more importantly, we're not marketing in the day that we live in.